Agwani family, Neesu, Wushuwunoag, Pumham Sage, Mashipagnagan, the tribe, Director General, Federation of Aboriginal Nations of America, Ascutta Squamson, that is to say, how are you all doing? I am in my basement and just want to share a few thoughts. I do this from time to time, but just sharing some thoughts. Want to address a couple of issues I've been seeing. I think people know I'm pretty active on social media. I check out the YouTube. Just like to know what's going on, especially in terms of all of the stuff that we're involved in. And I want to shout out a lot of the people that are out there spreading this awareness, doing research, educating people about the true history of what happened in these lands, because there's so many lies and craziness going around. So I want to address a couple things today, because I think they're very important that they be addressed. The first is going to be this foolishness about everyone of a melanated complexion in these lands is from Africa. That's particularly concerning as a Nahiganset, right? Because that was the strategy that the state of Rhode Island used to detribalize my people back in the late 1800s. Oh, you guys have too much African blood, therefore you're no longer an Indian tribe. So why would they do that? And of course we know, a lot of us have been doing research and all that sort of stuff. It was about the land claims, right? Because our agreements, our issues were with the British, and whatever, I'm still learning that aspect as well. The Europeans that came here to colonize, and when the U.S. stepped away from them, they didn't really have any relationship or agreements with us. So what do? You're all from Africa, right? And there goes the whole problem. No need to worry about whose land it is anymore, because if you're from Africa, then obviously you're not from here. As a matter of fact, you were brought here by who? By the European colonists. So therefore, you're here because they brought you here. So this land isn't yours. So when I hear this thrown around that, oh, we're all from Africa, I don't get it. And as a matter of fact, I take it as a lot of disrespect, and no disrespect to the brothers and sisters from the continent. But it's a continent. You know what I'm saying? It's a continent. On that continent, there are tribes and there are nations. Right? No different here. All right? I'm a Nahiganset from here. I'm not from Africa. And when I hear people talking about, oh, everyone's from Africa, I don't understand a lot of the logic of it, right? I don't get it. Because if everyone's from Africa, then white people are from Africa, or Europeans are from Africa. But we don't want to hear that. We want to stop that, right? If everyone's from Africa, then these quote-unquote that everyone's bashing, these Mongoloids, are from Africa, right? So I'm not quite understanding. I don't get it. I don't get it. Everyone's not from Africa. If you want to go back thousands of years, I mean, there's a lot of debate going on around that online. Some people saying that they're out of Africa theory they believe in. Other people saying that we were everywhere. I know my people's oral history is that we've always been here. But I don't even want to get into thousands of years ago. I'm speaking specifically around this issue that we're facing, which is European colonization. We're not from Africa. We're not. My people are not from Africa. The Pokanokets are not from Africa. The Kiskiats or the Powhatans are not from Africa. The Sandhill Band of Lenape and Cherokee Indians are not from Africa. Uskapog is not from Africa. Ninigrit is not from Africa. Sibuku Bayamon, Baramaya Guania, these are not people from Africa. They're from right here in these lands called the Americas. So if you have people that look like me, that are from right here in these lands, going all the way back, bloodlines before the U.S., then how can you argue that every melanated person here in these lands is from Africa? And from where in Africa? So we're just from the continent? Because like I said, Africans have tribes. There's Igbos, there's Yorubas, and I saw a video the other day, or a meme, There was like hundreds of different just ethnic groups in this place now called Nigeria. But we're claiming the entire, it's foolishness. So let me dispel that myth right now. My people look like me. There's no evidence that all of us mixed with Africans. There's no such thing as a black person, which means that that melanated person has to come from somewhere. And if you can't prove that they're from Africa, from a specific nation or tribe, it's an unsubstantiated claim. It's an unsubstantiated claim. And then I've seen things tossed around like 12.5 million African slaves brought to the U.S. That's all nonsense. Where is the evidence backing up that claim that you're making? You can make the claim. You can claim to be wherever you want to be from. That doesn't mean you actually are, right? And that's what this is all about, right? Who we actually are. So if you're going to say that everyone melanated here is from Africa, you need to prove that. Prove it. Show documentation, not theories, not what was taught to you, but show me the proof that everyone's from Africa. I find it very disrespectful to the brothers and sisters from the continent who know where they're from, who know who their bloodlines tie back to, that people that can't substantiate any claim to their would claim their entire continent. To me, that's like European. That's colonialism. That's colonialism being visited upon the people of the continent of Africa, because it wasn't called Africa back then when colonization and all that was going on. It wasn't called Africa. The whole continent wasn't called Africa. All right? And how are you just going to claim a whole continent? Who did you get permission from to do that? Who did you get permission from over in that continent? Which chief, which king did you get permission from to claim the entire continent where their bloodlines have been going back for as far as they can remember, that you can't substantiate to, and you're just going to claim the entire continent because you're of a similar complexion to them? It's the height of ignorance. Now, let me be clear. I personally am not saying that there were not African slaves that were brought here to the U.S. We're in these territories that they now refer to as Rhode Island. This was one of the largest slave ports. I can't tell you what percentage of slaves came through Rhode Island first before they went down south, because they would come here, they would get rum, they would, trade off for cotton, all of that sort of stuff. The Industrial Revolution with cotton and all that started here in Rhode Island. The Industrial Revolution started here in Rhode Island, Slater's Mill. You can go look it up. So a lot of that was coming based off of the tremendous amount of money that was being made from the slave trade. And this is how universities like Brown got started. They did a whole report on it. You can go look at the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, for those of you who have seen the video Indian Slavery at Brown University that I had the good pleasure of coordinating and organizing about 2 years ago. That was with the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. They created a whole center to address the impact and the relationship that Brown had with slavery. So I'm not one of those saying that there were no African slaves brought here. What I'm saying is the amount of African slaves that were brought to the United States, as they're known today, was minuscule compared to the amount of Indians that were enslaved here and then sent into places like the Caribbean and others. And I'm talking going back to the Pequot Wars, King Philip's War, whatever you want. And I think it's so interesting to me, right? Because you see these brothers and sisters claiming that we're all from Africa, but none of them reach out to any of the chiefs from any of the tribes that are pre-colonial to ask them if what they've been taught actually matches up with what's going on. Instead, we get regurgitated what they were taught in school, that, oh, you're from Africa. My people are not from Africa. Let me be very clear. Nahigansets are not from Africa. I don't care what you were taught. I don't care what you think. We're not from Africa. And our complexions vary. And this is going to take me over to the other part of the combo. But before I go there, I just want to finish this up. If you're going to claim every melanated person is from Africa, you have to be able to prove it. I don't care what you think. I don't care what you were taught. I don't care what you want to believe. you need to prove it. Just like these Europeans, and that's the other thing even about Europeans. People have this assumption that European means white, which means a lighter skin, and none of that's true. There were dark-skinned, melanated Europeans that came over here and taught and assisted the light-skinned Europeans in how to be a part of colonizing here. So to claim that every melanated person is from Africa is absurd. The whole continent wasn't called Africa. You need to tell me where specifically your bloodline's tied to, which tribe. The DNA stuff is even foolishness, right? Let's touch on DNA for a second. Because I keep getting this. I just got into it a couple, like last week. I guess it was a Plains Indian. And he was upset with some of the foolishness coming out of the Aboriginal community. I'm going to touch base on that in a second, but just let me focus here for a second. And he's trying to tell me, well, why don't you do your DNA? I said, well, what do I need to do my DNA for, right? When I have historical certified paperwork from the state showing who my people are, direct bloodline connection, and what they did to us. For those who may or may not know, my fourth great-grandfather was Chief Bristol Michael, Narragansett Indian tribe. You can look up the 1881 report to the Commission on Indian Affairs when they were detribalizing us. I have a copy of his death certificate, and he's colored on it. He's colored. He was the chief of the tribe, and he's colored. And if you see a picture of him and his children, you're like, how on earth did they get mistaken for being from Africa? So I had to eventually, that was my thing. Well, what do I need to get DNA for if it's already substantiated, everything's already proven, there's no question about it. And then there's my second question with the DNA from DNA thing. If they're testing specifically for the tribes that are out west, because that's where the majority of the tribes are coming from, right? If those are the markers that you're checking for, why would I show up if I'm not from those bloodlines? Why aren't you checking the markers from the tribes that are here, that are substantiated, that know who they are, that can prove it without a shadow of a doubt? There's no question who they are. Why aren't you using them for the basis to decide what an Indian from the East Coast, what their DNA markers should be like? I'm just posing that question out there. That's my question to all of these DNA pushers out there. For those who seek it, if that's the route you choose to go, that's fine. But why do I need to do that when it's quite clear historically and whatever you want that I am who I say I am? There's no question. I'm in the same land my people were in when colonization started. From Chief Bristol Michael down to me, it's all women down my line. Right here in these same lands. What do you mean I need a DNA test? It's craziness. So that's the first thing I want to address, this pan-African craziness, right? Because it's craziness to assume that you can tell where every melanated person comes from based on what you were taught, which is foolishness. 12.5 million African slaves brought to the U.S. Prove it. Prove pan-Africanism. Prove that Narragansetts and Pokanoket are from Africa. And if we're from Africa because thousands of years ago, people believed it out of Africa theory, then everyone's African. Everyone. So there's no point in even discussion who's an African or not, because everyone's an African. So which is it? Either everyone's an African, or there's a specific phenotype and grouping of people that we're going to call Africans and we're going to exclude other people. Because if you're going to exclude other people, then you should be excluding us as well. We are not from Africa. And once again, that's with all due respect and love to all of my African people, my Ghanaians, my Nigerians, my who else do I know? The Liberians. I know so many people from West Africa. I've met people from countries, tribes, all throughout the continent. Much respect to you all. Beautiful people, beautiful cultures. But they should be respected for who they are. They shouldn't be lumped in with everyone that's of a melanated hue because that's what we were taught. Australians, the Aboriginals from Australia don't believe they're from Africa. They don't believe, they say they've been right in their lands. Whether they wrong too about themselves because of what people were taught in colonized schools. So let's just remove that right there. And until someone can prove to me that I'm from Africa, that whole Pan-African theory is out the window. It's out the window. Because you have to be able to substantiate it through and through. If you want to say African influences and there were people that were brought here from Africa that have lived here for very long periods of time, I'm cool with that. But to say that everyone's from Africa and they were all brought here as a result of the transatlantic slave trade, don't insult my ancestors, my bloodlines, or the struggle that we've had. Because like I said, that's exactly the argument that the colonizers used to strip my people of their land back in 1881. And if you follow 100 years later, in about 79 to 81, the family down in South County was federally recognized because it was brought to light that that was illegal on the part of the state. Not only was it brought to light that that was illegal on the part of the state, but no one tried since to say that my people are from Africa. They're from right here. And if you look at my people, Narragansett Indian tribe, look at some of the pictures and all that, a lot of them are darker than me. Do you know what oral tradition from my people says a Narragansett looks like? Tall, copper-colored with kinky hair. That's what they say, my own people say about themselves. So let's just do away with that Pan-African nonsense right there. I just want to address that. Everyone melanated in this continent didn't come here from Africa through the transatlantic slave trade. And if you're going to say that everyone is African because they migrated from there, then everyone's African, including these Europeans that were so upset about for colonizing us. And therefore, you've just washed away your entire argument because everyone's from Africa. Everyone's not from Africa in terms of this colonial system we're dealing with. Now, having said that and having addressed this Pan-African craziness, let me address some of my Aboriginal folks too, right? Because I had a very, very ugly conversation with a gentleman the other day, and there's no brotherhood between this individual and I. I think everyone's seen the lovely pictures. If you follow me on IG or anything, you've seen the lovely pictures of my daughter, right? And I get it. If you looked at my daughter, you might think she was half, quote unquote, white. You might. But you know what's crazy? That's the same thing people thought about my grandmother. They thought she was Irish. That's the same thing people thought about my grandmother's third eldest daughter. They ask, well, what are you? Because she doesn't look black. Why? Because in my family lines, color variation and hue runs the gamut. In my own family lines, my grandmother is the same complexion as my daughter is, who is the same complexion as my grandmother's grandmother was. And if you look at the pictures of my own family line, you'll see the color just varies. Why? Because melanated people have the ability to produce people of different hues, right? That's scientific. We know that. So if you looked at my daughter, you might think she was half white, but she's not. Her people are from out of Morelia in Mexico. Well, in Michoacan, I'm sorry, Morelia is the capital of Michoacan. My daughter is Aperature. And for those who may not know, the Aperature were one of the only nations to back the Aztecs down. They were there in those lands before the Aztecs, when the Aztecs moved in. And they were such formidable enemies to the Aztecs that the Aztecs ended up doing trade with them. So for this individual, who I could tell had no idea that a Aperature even existed, all right, to go base specifically off of the skin tone of an individual to decide what they are, that's disgusting. That's disgusting, all right? Because the same thing happened to us. Oh, you're melanated of a certain tone, you must be from Africa. And he said some very disparaging things about a 2-year-old. I told this brother, and this was the other part. So after I break down to him where he's wrong, he gets cocky. Well, oh, okay. And I said, yeah, I know it's okay. What else would it be? Then he tells me, because I start tagging him in pictures of my family to show him he doesn't know what he's talking about. Oh, if you don't cut it out, I'm going to block you. Then he blocks me. So not only are you ignorant and uninformed, but still have the nerve to open your mouth, but then when you're wrong, you don't acknowledge that you're wrong, and instead you block me to go on about your day. I told him, you're lucky you're not around me right now so I could put my hands on you. So let me explain something. This notion that you are supposed to look a certain color to be able to be an Aborigine is absurd. Let me say that up front and direct, all right? Yes, there were several, lots, perhaps even the majority of our people were a darker complexion, but that doesn't mean that if you're of a lighter complexion, you're not an Indian. Now you're getting into the whole Bloodquantum nonsense and all that. And once again, it's the same thing that's been utilized to take our people away from our land. Why would we visit that upon ourselves? I also want to address this too, because I've been seeing this this notion that because our tribe or nations were matrilineal, and because the membership in your particular clan usually followed the mother's side, that if you have European blood in you, you automatically go with the mother. That's absurd. One drop of Indian blood makes you an Indian. One drop. It was this colonial perspective that, well, I'm going to now bring this child underneath my guidance because they're mine, that destroyed us. But this notion that somehow outside of being Indians, if your mother is a European, you are a European is absurd. One drop of Indian blood makes you an Indian. One drop. And that's what my people, if there's even one drop of Narragansett blood in your body, you're a Narragansett. All right? Plain and simple. And I'll go to bat on that, and I'll argue with people until we're both blue in the face. Because you're not going to tell me that my people would have disowned someone because one of their parents would have been European. No. They would have said, you have some of that blood in you, but you also have some of this blood. And since you have some of this blood, you need to keep these traditions alive. You need to respect these lands. You need to conduct yourself accordingly. So let's do away with that. If we're talking Indian to Indian and we want to go that route, that's fine, because that's how our people dealt with each other a lot. But if we're talking Indian to non-Indian, and that Indian is still in the lands where their forefathers were, how are they not an Indian? Because you don't like the hue of their skin tone? Because you don't like who they chose to marry? You sound like a colonizer to me. Real talk. You sound like a colonizer. An Indian is an Indian is an Indian. All right? And how many of us in our own families right now who are coming to the realization that we were misclassified don't have people in our own families who have willfully gone out and married people of other races? Does that make their children not Indians? Look, man, I think it's wonderful that we're getting educated and informing ourselves. That's what we should be doing. What we can't do now is swing to the whole other extreme and become what we've been fighting against, right? We can't do that. We can't become what we've been fighting against. We can't be judging people based off of their skin tone without finding out who they are and where they come from. We can't be saying, oh, you don't have enough of this to be a real Indian. Because it's the same thing that happened to us. You go to a lot of these federally recognized reservations, and they're going to tell you, you don't have enough of this or enough of that to be on our rules, right? And we're going to whine and complain and talk about how it's not right, and then we're going to turn around and say to someone else, oh, you're too light-skinned. The original Indians were this, so you can't be, you're a hypocrite. You're a hypocrite. You become exactly what the colonizer was working towards. A tool of your own demise. One drop of Indian blood makes you an Indian. One drop. And if you respect that bloodline enough to conduct yourself accordingly and to be what your people are, then who is anyone to tell you you can't? Now, when you get into this nonsense, because this is what ends up happening, where you start dividing along color lines, and then lighter Indians start manipulating and control, that's a problem too. Because an Indian's an Indian. And we know the history. Indians were melanated people. So that's to the lighter side of the conversation. Who are you to be deciding that you're going to run things and be dividing along color lines? That's foolishness. My people, we're coming into a great age of understanding. It's been referred to in certain instances as the age of revelations, right? Everything that was hidden is coming to light. Remember, above all, it's a spiritual battle. Don't turn into what we've been fighting against, right? Don't turn into a real Indianer. Don't turn into that. Don't do it. Educate, uplift, instruct. If someone gets out of line, inform them, check them, whatever you need to do. But let's not turn into what we've been fighting against. Let's not do that to each other. Our people are a beautiful people. They came in all colors, shades, hues, but it's the bloodline that ties back. Don't do the colonizers' work for them. Pan-Africanism is craziness. And for the Aboriginal folks who are learning or know who they are, respect people because of their bloodlines. Don't get caught up in this race nonsense. There was no race before this colonization nonsense started. We went off of bloodlines, family ties, and content of character. That's where we need to be getting back to. That's all, family. Appreciate your time today. I hope you're... What's today? Tuesday. So off to a great start. And looking forward to connecting with y'all on the flip side. I hope.